His interest in cryptozoology began the day he witnessed a creature that was beyond his belief, or, as he thought, the boundaries of reality. The incident was reported to an investigator several years ago in hopes that they could get more information from the local authorities. Unfortunately, that investigator was unable to help. The day of the encounter was May 9th around 10 a.m. John was fishing on the south branch of the river, about 1 kilometer downstream from the highway. The weather was sunny and slightly breezy. The section of river flattened out, then flowed into a larger pool, an area he had fished several times before. John was on the south bank when he noticed a stray mixed breed dog sniffing around a thicket on the bank. The dog was approximately 50 feet away from him in the bushes. John was not concerned about the dog bothering him, so he just put it out of his mind and concentrated on fishing. About a few minutes later, he heard the dog barking and growling. He thought she had woken up a deer, but when he looked in the direction of the noise, he spotted a dark, hairy creature bouncing around in the thicket. John stopped catching and moved closer to get a better look at what was going on and noticed that the dog had stopped barking. Suddenly, he heard the dog squeal loudly and the creature stood up. The best he could make out was that this Verzila was about 2.5 to 3 meters tall and had dark tangled hair. He could only see the body from the chest up because the rest of the body was hidden by the thicket. He stood perfectly still and heard a series of stomping sounds as he watched the creature walk slowly through the thicket towards the forest. He began to follow it, and meanwhile smelled a strong musky odor that reminded him of urine, took a look at his pants, and realized it was time to get out of here as fast as possible. He walked back to his car to drive into town and notify the authorities immediately. On the way back to his car, he noticed the dog. It had noticeable blood around its neck and rear end, but it appeared to be able to move. He decided it was best to stay away from the dog. John drove to the nearest phone to report the incident. The local police told him to go back to the neighborhood and they would meet him there. So he got back in his car and drove back to the river. To his surprise, the police boat was already there. The police officer told him to get in his car and leave immediately because they didn't know how dangerous the situation was. He tried to explain to them that he had already reported everything, but they wouldn't let him talk and told him to leave again. He returned to the area about 1 hour later, and it was full of people and other official vehicles. A man standing near the road told him that someone had found hair samples, but he declined to comment further. For years, he had tried to gather information from local authorities regarding the incident, but he was always told that there is no information or we have no reports of an incident. He has since decided that he will conduct his own investigations and find information on his own about what happened to him while fishing. One of the first steps in his investigation was to visit the library. He decided that here he could find books, articles, or other sources of information about unknown creatures, including the one he had seen on the river. He spent many hours in the library studying books about cryptozoology, famous sightings of unknown animals, and legends about creatures from around the world. He took notes, wrote out facts that interested him, and tried to find out if there were other records of similar encounters in his area. John also talked to other people who had similar encounters or had heard of similar cases. He searched for information on the internet, in journals, scientific articles, and blogs. He became an active participant in forums where cryptozoological topics were discussed and even started his own blog where he shared his research and findings. Through these endeavors, John gathered a lot of information about unknown creatures, including some that he himself had stalked. His opinion stopped at the fact that it was Bigfoot, because the description of his encounter and the creature's physical characteristics are very similar to those of the Sasquatch, which, according to legends, inhabits mountainous areas and has a covering of hair. Also, the strong, musky odor he smelled may be characteristic of this creature. He learned that mountain creatures dwell in caves while forest creatures build huts in trees. He is 2.5 meters tall, with long arms and a slightly forward jaw. The face is black, completely covered with black and gray fur. It moves vertically. According to eyewitnesses, the breasts of Bigfoot females are so large that they throw them behind their backs when running. Very strong. All muscle groups are well developed, can on 2 legs to develop speed up to 70 to 80 kilometers per hour, good swimmers. John realized that to really confirm his assumptions that he had seen Bigfoot, he needed to personally see him again. He decided to go fishing in the same area where his first encounter with the unknown creature had taken place. He decided to prepare for the trip as best as he could. John gathered his fishing equipment, took some provisions for a few days as well as warm clothes, a sleeping bag, and a tent. He also decided to prepare to investigate the Bigfoot encounter. John took his camera with him so that he would be able to take pictures of the creature if he had the opportunity. John loaded his gear into his car early in the morning and went fishing in the same area where he had seen the Bigfoot. He chose a secluded spot on the bank of the river, set up his gear, and began fishing. Even though his thoughts were on Bigfoot, he focused on fishing so he wouldn't miss anything important. Hours passed, and John began to feel a little worried as nothing suspicious was happening. He decided to take a break and have lunch to regain his strength and continue his search. After lunch, he decided to walk along the riverbank to explore the area more closely. He stopped at the spot where he had last seen the creature and began to scrutinize the surrounding area. John scrutinized the area closely and suddenly discovered something strange on the ground. They were huge paw prints that resembled the footprints from the huge paws of a humanoid creature. He was amazed and worried that he might be close to another encounter with Bigfoot. He immediately pulled out his camera and took some photos of the footprints. He also decided to leave a small marked trail behind him so that he could find his way back if necessary. After he photographed the tracks, John decided to investigate further. He followed the tracks, scrutinizing the surrounding terrain, and saw that they led to a small cave in the rock. At this time, the sun was beginning to set, and John realized that going further into the cave would be risky due to the darkness. He decided to return to his camp to spend the night in safety. On the way back, he continued to feel the inner tension from all the events that had transpired. On the one hand, he was excited that he had found the tracks again and that he might be close to meeting Bigfoot. On the other hand, he realized that this encounter could be dangerous and he had to be careful. When he arrived at his camp, he built a fire to keep warm, cooked dinner, and settled in for the night. Thoughts of what might happen the next day kept him uneasy. In the night, he was awakened by a strange noise in the camp. His heart beat faster, but he didn't dare leave the tent because it was too dark and scary. He decided to stay inside and just wait it out. At dawn, when he left the tent, he found that his briefcase with his gear and the food he had left by the fire had mysteriously disappeared. It was a strange and frightening discovery. He realized that something or someone had visited his camp during the night. With no basic gear with him, he realized that his plans to continue his investigation could be thwarted. Even so, he was prepared to keep looking for signs of Bigfoot and try to encounter him again. He decided not to back down and set off further down the trail leading to the cave he had discovered yesterday. It was quite dark inside the cave, but he found a slit of light that illuminated the entrance. Deciding to take his chances, he continued to move deeper into the cave, examining every corner, hoping to find any clues to the existence of Bigfoot. As he moved further into the depths of the cave, it became increasingly dark and eerie. He heard some rustles and sounds from the darkness that made him freeze in place. But inside him, he felt a genuine interest and desire to see the person he had met last time. He continued to move deeper into the cave, scrutinizing every corner. Suddenly, in one corner, he saw his scattered briefcase and leftover food. This made him look at the cave from a slightly different angle. He noticed that something was moving in the deepest recessed corner of the cave. His heart hammered harder as he realized it was a creature standing with its back to him. He managed to make out its outline. It was Bigfoot. As before, he was amazed by its size, strength, and intimidating appearance. The creature cautiously turned around to look at him, their eyes meeting. The tension in the air was palpable. They stood against each other, each assessing the situation. For John, this was the moment of truth. He was face to face with the Sasquatch he had been hearing about and searching for so long. John was in a state of shock and excitement upon discovering the Bigfoot in the dark cave. He quickly looked around the scattered items to find his camera and capture this amazing moment. He managed to find the camera and picked it up, but suddenly he felt a hard blow to his head. John was stunned by the blow, and he lost consciousness for a few moments. When he came to, he found himself lying on the floor of the cave, exhausted and with pain in his head. He realized that he had been attacked by a Sasquatch, probably because he was trying to take a picture of it. Gathering his last bit of strength, John decided to try to leave the cave. He slowly rose to his feet, feeling sore and dizzy, and began to move towards the exit. The darkness and silence of the cave was intimidating, but he was determined not to give up. As he got closer to the exit, he heard sounds behind him. He turned around and saw that Bigfoot was behind him. He realized that he had to act fast to save himself. John rushed toward the cave exit, overcome with pain and fatigue. The Sasquatch followed him, making menacing noises and coming closer and closer. Finally, John made his way out of the cave into the fresh air and rushed toward his camp. He didn't look back, continuing to run until he reached his car. Sitting in his car, John was startled to see the Sasquatch standing just a few dozen feet away from him. He was stunned by its appearance. Huge, powerful, covered in coarse black and gray fur. The creature's eyes were full of menace, and his muscular body was tense, ready for action. John felt his heart racing with fear and his hands trembling. He realized he was in danger, and the only thing he could do was sit still and hope the creature didn't attack him. Sasquatch stood motionless, studying John with his menacing eyes. He was an inhabitant of the area and probably considered him an enemy. John realized that every second now could be his last, and he prayed that the creature would not attack him. A few moments seemed like an eternity before the Sasquatch slowly turned away and slowly disappeared into the woods. He remained sitting in his car for a long time, trying to comprehend everything that had happened. With trepidation in his hands, John grabbed a piece of paper and a pen. His heart was still beating faster, leaving him with the sight of Bigfoot. He began to describe the creature. Its enormous stature, its coarse fur, its muscular body, its menacing stare. He pictured its silhouette with every detail he could remember. Each line on the piece of paper was like a step for him to understand and recognize this mysterious creature. He drew it with trepidation, feeling that this creature had left an indelible mark on his soul. When he finished the drawing, John ran his pencil over the outline to pay special attention to each detail. It seemed to him that this drawing encapsulated his research, his experience, his fear and delight at meeting such a creature. He contemplated his drawing, feeling that it deserved to be shown to others. He knew that the world did not believe such creatures existed, but he had something to show, something he had seen that had left a mark on his soul. When he finished the drawing, John hid it in his briefcase, hoping that he would always have the strength to return to the area again and encounter Bigfoot again. He knew that this was only part of his research, and that he had a whole world of mysteries and secrets open before him that he intended to solve. After hiding his drawing, John picked up his camera again and decided to print the Bigfoot footprints to prove his encounter. The next step would be to share his research and tell the world what he had seen and experienced. After returning home, John was eager to tell his coworkers about his amazing encounter with Bigfoot. He shared all the details of his adventure, from the moment he saw the creature on the river to the moment he met it in the cave. His friends were amazed by his story. They listened with open mouths and eyes, absorbing every word. Everything was as believable as possible, and everyone in the room felt excitement and awe upon hearing John's story. They asked him many questions, clarifying details and expressing their amazement. Each of them realized that John had experienced something incredible, and it had changed his life forever. However, when John told them that he had gone to the Secret Service and that all the evidence had been taken from him, everyone was shocked. They couldn't believe this had happened and were outraged that the organization had seized all of John's evidence and asked him to keep quiet. John explained to his colleagues that he understood the serious and that his responsibilities as a citizen were to follow the instructions of the intelligence services. He understood that this encounter with Bigfoot was an unusual study and that he had to maintain confidentiality. However, this decision was not taken lightly by him, and they continued to discuss with him the investigations and implications of this event. John discovered that the Wild Assault Channel specializes in wildlife documentaries and unknown animals, and he thought it was the perfect place to tell his story. He decided that an exclusive interview with the channel would help him get his story out to millions of viewers around the world. Not long after his encounter with his friends, John contacted the Wild Assault Channel and offered them an exclusive interview about his encounter with Bigfoot. He told them all the details of his adventure, showed them photos of the tracks and his drawing of the creature, and convinced them of the seriousness and significance of his discovery. The Wild Assault Channel was impressed with his story and saw the potential for a unique documentary. The first thing you should know is that the Leshy is syncretic. That is, he can appear in the guise of a spirit and in the guise of a man, in the guise of a talking mushroom or a reasonable animal of an outlandish color. This is explained by the fact that the Leshy, as well as any unclean force, is rarely honored with descriptions of appearance in bylinas and legends because of superstitious fear of storytellers. The height of the Leshy, he can be taller than the tallest forest trees, and at the same time not exceed the size of a reed if a person meets him in the field. The Leshy likes to lure people into the thicket, for it is fun, and in the forest the Leshy is bored. But this is done, of course, not just for fun, but if a person has behaved too disrespectful either to the forest master or to the forest itself. Taking into account that the Leshy is a forest shepherd, any disrespect to forest animals, which the stupid hunter shoots for fun, will cause the Leshy's anger, and he can easily crush the hunter with the trunk of some heavy tree until the guts come out of his ass. The Leshy likes to sit down in the guise of a random traveler to the fire and gladly listens to stories. But if he does not like the stories or a person in any way provokes the forest master, the Leshy will scatter the fire. And the most unsuccessful humorist will make the long wander through the forest until he realizes the full gravity of his inept petrosianstvo. As a child, in the forest, which Laura knew like the back of her hand, she met face to face with a terrible monster. Her blood ran cold and her heart felt as if it had been dipped into a bucket of cold water. Laura stood frozen and could not move. It looked like a man, but it wasn't human. He wasn't covered in fur, but he was all black. His skin had deep wrinkles like the bark of a tree, eyes like two torches burning with a sinister fire. His mouth was so huge that it ended near his ears. He seemed to be smiling, but it was a hideous, creepy grin. He seemed young at first glance, but his wrinkles gave him away as an ancient old man. He appeared silently and unexpectedly. When Laura saw him, they were only 2 steps apart. She looked him straight in the eye. His gaze was frightening, not human, as if he had come from another world. I don't know how long it lasted, a minute or an hour, but time seemed to cease to exist at that moment. Mentally, she began to reassure herself. It's okay, it's just the village weirdo, we should say hello to him. But her tongue wouldn't listen, she couldn't say anything. And then she heard his voice, but not the way we normally hear sounds. It came loud and clear in her head. It was as if a bell had been struck in the silence. You've had it, girl, now I'll show you. Her eyes darkened with fear, a little more, and she would have fainted. But then her legs gave way on their own. She was able to tear her gaze away from the monster and looked around, calculating where to run. Having mapped out her route, she turned back around and the man... gone. Only a large dried oak tree with its trunk partially bare stood in that spot. It was covered with bark exactly where the monster had just been. On woozy legs, she ran away a few meters, turned around again, and saw that the oak had disappeared too. There were young trees growing all around and no big old oaks among them. After running a little more, she realized she was lost and panic gripped her. Laura was running in circles like a madwoman, and she thought she could hear stomping and creepy laughter behind her. Laura had always been good at navigating the forest, but this time she couldn't figure out where to go. Laura suddenly felt a chill that enveloped her body, and then the sound of her heavy breathing suddenly cut off. She didn't care about that. She needed to get out of this horrible place. She ran without looking back, even though the rainbow light that was the normal forest was overwhelmed by the horror of this place. The faster she ran, the sharper she smelled the odor of rotting grass and decaying wood, and the clearer became the sound of heavy footsteps that followed her. She knew that this sound was coming toward her. And so, when Laura decided to look around to see what was following her, she saw the creature, the monster that had just stood before her. Laura froze in place in horror as she saw the huge tree standing in front of her. Its trunk was slightly crooked as if it wished to make a sign and remind her of its presence. Underneath the tree, Laura noticed a crevice that seemed hidden and mysterious. Without a second thought, she dashed in that direction, trying to quicken her steps. Laura dove into the narrow crevice, pressing her lips together and ducking down to fit. The ground clung tightly to her body, but she kept moving forward despite the fear that made her heart beat faster. The monster, seeing her slipping away, tried to reach for her with its paws, but Laura was faster. She traversed every turn, every corner, afraid that the monster would pull her by the leg and drag her outside. The monster made terrible squeals and hissing noises, filling the air with fear and terror. Its paws stuck out menacingly into the narrow gap, trying to grab Laura's leg or shoulder. Its sharp claws tore through the air with force, reaching closer and closer. Laura lay under the tree, clenching her lips to keep from making a sound. Tears streamed down her cheeks, and her heart was pounding so loudly she thought it would shatter. She realized that at any second the monster could get her, and her fear was genuine. In a few moments there was silence. Laura looked up and saw that the monster was gone. In place of its presence, she saw only the light filtering through the leaves of the trees and the faint whisper of the wind. She was left lying on the ground, listening to her heavy sighs and slowly calming down from her fright. Slowly rising to her feet, Laura looked around. She was in a deep forest, surrounded by old trees and thick foliage. Birdsong and the sound of a stream could be heard in the distance, but the monster was nowhere to be seen. Laura did not hesitate, realizing that the most important thing now was to stay alive. Rushed through the thicket, running through the dense forest, pushing off the trunks of trees, overtaking branches and bushes. Her legs were already covered with scratches and her arms were shaking with fatigue. But she kept moving forward until finally she was at the edge of the forest where the first houses could be seen in the distance. Finally, Laura reached her house, wet with tears. She ran inside, locked the door, and fell to the floor, panting and shivering. But thanks to her timely escape, she survived. From then on, Laura never again forgot that the forest hid secrets and dangers that could await anyone who dared to enter them. She never told anyone about what happened to her in the forest. Only a few years later, reading fairy tales to her son, she realized that this monster was very similar to the description of the forest, only in children's books he is presented much prettier. Later, she learned that many locals had encountered this creature in that forest, so this meeting was not a figment of her imagination. That's what they called him, Scary Grandpa. It's the one face that sticks in my memory forever. This forest is now recognized as an anomalous zone,